Technology evangelist for ray tracing in Unreal Engine at Nvidia. My background is in game design and production. My goal today is to help increase your understanding of ray tracing in general, and more specifically the developments we have at Nvidia to make it run faster and better for you. I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of ray tracing as it exists today in the Unreal Engine, and then we'll take a look at the improvements we're doing at Nvidia in the NVRTX branch. We have an example project that I hope will help you develop your own ray trace projects. Finally, I'll end the talk by showing you some of the upcoming technologies that will enhance ray tracing. One of the key things to understand about ray tracing is that it's a very flexible system. You can mix and match different effects with raster. This flexibility is important because it gives you the ability to design the look and performance you want to achieve. The sort of hybrid rendering nature of ray tracing in Unreal Engine allows you to maintain a lot of compatibility with current systems and content while also getting high performance. It's meant to be a best of both worlds approach. Something else to understand about ray tracing is that it's evolving and getting better. It's not a static thing. The first release happened with Unreal Engine 4.22. We're at 4.25 today, and with each next major release there have been considerable improvements to the feature set, its capabilities, and so on. As of 4.25, ray tracing is considered to be out of beta and shipworthy, ready for anything you might throw at it. And as you'll see, there are new features just on the horizon that are going to take it up another notch. You should also understand that conceptually, ray tracing is higher quality than raster. Almost anything higher quality is naturally going to consume more resources and be more challenging to optimize. That said, this is a challenge we take on at Nvidia, and a big part of improving performance is making sure you have the information and tools to make better choices for your project. Another way to look at this is to say that ray tracing is more powerful and accurate. Shadows are higher fidelity. You get real reflections on any surface. Translucency renders correctly in a depth-sorted way for the first time ever. These are monumental improvements in real-time rendering. When you start designing your project to take advantage of ray tracing, shadows and reflections are the most obvious place to start. I'll show you examples of each and ways you can take advantage of them. This isn't to discount translucency at all. In games, we traditionally haven't done much with translucency as an effect, partly because it won't always render right or performance was never that great. Sometimes it just hasn't been worth the trouble, so we minimize its usage. There are technologies coming up that may transform how we think about translucency in a real-time setting, and as promised, you'll get a preview of that today. So let's talk about the NVRTX branch and what it has to offer. This is our main branch at Nvidia for Unreal Engine 4 that contains all of our latest enhancements, improvements, and new features we're adding to ray tracing. First thing to note is it's very optimized for ray tracing. Most of these optimizations are transparent to you. Improvements that make the engine take less CPU time, for example, to do its ray tracing calculations. Several of these optimizations have console commands so you can tweak the values yourself. Documentation on that is located on our website. The example project we've released makes use of many of these console commands, and their usage is documented in the level blueprint or in the level itself. Second is new features, like hybrid translucency. This gives you another way to do translucency in a ray trace setting, and as the name implies, it is a hybrid between ray traced and raster methods. Its biggest advantages are better compatibility with cascade particles, materials, and better performance. This is a good feature to use if you have a game already in production and you want strong compatibility between ray traced and raster modes. Third is tools. There are new tools in NVRTX like the BVH viewer. The BVH, or bounding volume hierarchy, is a necessary part of ray tracing, basically putting invisible volumes around every mesh in your scene in order to ray test against more efficiently. The downside is that excessive volume overlap can impact performance, and without a BVH viewer, you may not even know why your performance is taking a hit. We give you the ability to view this as a heat map, much like how you'd view your scene for material or lighting complexity. Same basic idea, and once you can visualize these hotspots, you can fine-tune them for performance. Last but not least is DLSS 2.0. This is a big one, as it will dramatically improve the performance of any PC game, ray-traced or raster. This is on top of the specific ray tracing performance enhancements we're doing in NVRTX. So the combination is a frame rate leap that is unlike anything we've ever seen before. I'll demonstrate some of that with the example project so you can see for yourself what DLSS brings to the table. Before I get into the full capabilities of ray tracing, I first wanted to show you an example of a level that's sort of a hybrid environment. This level is using ray traced reflections, but old school light maps for its lighting. And if you look closely, I mean, there's lots of stuff reflecting in this environment. It's making extensive use of reflections. And it's performing quite well, as you can see. But here we can see that it's definitely using light maps for its lighting. So the question becomes, why do that? And the answer is performance. If you wanted to make an environment where reflections were the absolute priority, and you wanted to make sure that you were hitting some really high performance target, 90 frames per second or above, you may want to consider not using every feature ray tracing has to offer. It's totally going to depend on the project. It's going to depend on your goals. But as an example, this shows that you don't have to have a pure system. You can mix and match the features, sort of create the look and the feel and the performance profile that you want. So baking down the lighting, but at the same time using advanced reflections is totally viable. And when it comes to ray tracing, it's a lot of mix and match. You're not going to be very limited on which raster features or old school rendering features and ray tracing features that you can mix together. You pretty much can pick and choose. There are some limitations. Certain combinations of things don't work together, but those are very few, and for the most part, that's not going to affect the vast majority of projects. Okay, so this is the basic example map for our NVRTX example project, and it's a fully ray traced level. So this is sort of one place to look for all of our technology features, everything we're developing or working on, as well as an example of how to use, basically how to use everything, how to use dynamic lighting and reflection and translucency. First thing I want to show you, though, is one of the key features of dynamic shadows. You can see a good example of it right here, just in the starting area. This shadow penumbra is, it's sometimes distance field shadows can kind of simulate this, but they don't necessarily do that great of a job. Like static geometry will be different than character geometry or skeletal geometry. And they never quite converge. They don't all, operate quite the same. With ray tracing, it's much more correct, and it's correct for everything, all types of geometry at all scales, no matter pretty much what's being rendered. So here it's just a very simple light source. There's actually a rect light right in this location. Where is he? There he is. He's set to fit this little bit of space right there. And you can see exactly how that behavior goes. Oops, as I move them back and forth. Creates very accurate shadow penumbra. And shadow accuracy is one of the biggest strengths of ray tracing. So as I was saying, this example project attempts to make use of pretty much everything ray tracing has to offer. And so you'll see examples of reflection and translucency and refraction and even translucent reflection. So that's what's going on here, is that some of these cubes are set to be full mirrors. So this is just pure reflection. You can't see through it at all. This one right next to it is actually a translucent one with some refraction, courtesy of hybrid translucency, and the material settings of that surface. And you can see it's also reflecting here. So as I pan the camera around, you can see that it starts to act more like a mirror. So you can see the character in there. And of course, you totally configure that yourself, how much translucency should it have as opposed to reflective behavior. You can see that it's getting decent performance. It's good, maybe not great though, but you can see it's doing a lot. Like I said, it's translucency and refraction and reflection going on. It's consuming quite a bit of the screen, and it's performing pretty good. But we can make this run even better with DLSS 2.0. So I can enable that. And there it is. You can see that it picked up quite a bit of performance doing that change. Actually, let me increase the DLSS quality. We'll lose a little bit of performance, but we'll go up one notch in quality there. But still, as you can see, it's quite a bit faster than it was before. I wanted to highlight this area here so you can see all the activity that ray traced lighting can do in the right usage. So again, we're fully dynamic in this scene, fully dynamic lighting, shadow, reflection, everything. But just looking at this surface right here, there's a lot going on. There's a sunlight, a ray trace sunlight, which is causing some direct lighting, and then a ray trace skylight, which is doing a lot of indirect lighting and shadow. Pretty much all of the soft shadow that you see on the surface here is coming as a result of either ray traced ambient occlusion or ray traced skylight. And you can pretty much see that here. If I take the skylight and I turn it off, how much more flat this gets. You can see that there's still a little bit of, it's very subtle, there's a little bit of shadow contribution from ambient occlusion. Down here in the corner it's slightly darker, but for the most part a lot of this lighting contribution is coming from the ray trace skylight. And you can see that with the right settings, if you just tweak a couple of flags, which is to turn on ray trace shadows for the skylight, and then turn off lower hemisphere of solid color. That one's on by default, but if you turn it off, you set this way, and I've pumped up the intensity scale a little bit. I mean, you can set it to whatever you're comfortable with. There's no wrong number. Here, I just set it to 1.5 because I think that's all right. It's adding some light but without going too far. You can literally see what it's doing. It's some great soft shadow contribution. There's light coming through this translucent surface here, and then projecting a ambient soft shadow into this corner. You can see that there's some really subtle and really nice ambient shadowing going on here in the doorway. Over on this side, this is pure skylight. There's no direct lighting on this. So this is the skylight, generating captured scene. You set all the attributes on that. You could switch it over if you wanted to be a specified cube map, and that will, it'll change your lighting profile depending on what cube map you use. Let's switch it to that one. See, it's green, so it fills green in. It does all this instead of sampling the sky dome itself, which is just really far away, and you can do that if you want. It's just a more expensive calculation. But like I said, you just take the cube map, project it into the scene, and it does basically it does ray tracing based off that cube map or captured scene, and gives you a nice soft occluded ambient shadow turn over your level. In the case of this location right here, the sampling that it's doing is fully spherical, provided this flag is off, right? If it's on, everything's going to get a lot darker, and you're going to lose that lower contribution, because it's basically only, it's saying the lower hemisphere is sampled as black in this case, so that's no good. So we turn that flag off, and we'll get lighting from everywhere, and that totally can work with a terrain, of course, because the terrain will just occlude that lower lighting, and since the sampling is fairly accurate, you're not going to have any lighting from beneath leaking through. It just depends on the scene that you're constructing. I would recommend turning that flag off. As you can see, it produces some pretty great results with a lot of physical accuracy, which is, like I've been saying, that's one of the main advantages to doing ray traced lighting and shadow, is the increased accuracy it gives you. So here we can see an example of hybrid translucency and what it does to your scene. So in this example right now, I'm using ray traced translucency and refraction. So it's very physically accurate. You can see that it's, we're seeing sort of like both sides of the cube. It's rendering, in a very sort of correct way. It's also distorting the character on the other side. This is all very simulated. It's literally using ray tracing to figure out how to render the translucency and distort the image. So it's like I was saying, this is very physically accurate for what you'd expect. Now, if I turn on hybrid translucency, we still get some distortion and an interesting effect. What's happening now is sort of a blend between raster and ray tracing for translucency. What we lose is ray traced refraction, and instead we're using the material refraction, basically the old sort of raster fake refraction that would be done through the material itself when this is active. What you gain with hybrid translucency is more performance and more compatibility with certain raster effects, like cascade particles. There's just one more thing I want to highlight for you on this level before we move on, and that's the just in an open world setting, the advantages that ray trace skylighting and ambient occlusion can bring to your scene. So this is kind of a subtle one, but it's neat. Here's my character up on a mountaintop, and you can imagine this world full of all kinds of foliage. Here I just have a simple grass object, but you get the idea. And you'll notice some subtle, interesting things going on with his lighting as he moves around. Up here, where there's nothing around him to, occlude his lighting, he's fairly brightly lit, almost as brightly lit as the sky in some ways. But as I move down here in between the hills, his lighting profile gets noticeably darker. And that's because there is ray traced occlusion and skylighting going on to affect how he's lit. So this would be true if he was standing under a tree or in a building. You would see his lighting shift around. I hope this is pretty obvious what's happening. I was picking an obvious spot, but you can see that it's he's shifting his values, his lighting values around in a fairly realistic way. If I switch this to raster rendering, you'll see, right off the bat just how, less accurate the lighting is. But, as I move down here, his lighting profile is not changing in any significant way. I move back up here, he's basically staying the same lighting value. And I'll switch back again. So this is with ray tracing on. You can see how much his ambient lighting changes depending on where he's at. One more level I want to go over, and that is it's a forest test scene, and this level is meant to be pretty much as possible like a realistic sample of how you might create a very high detailed photorealistic forest. Now here it is running in ray tracing mode, and you can see what the frame rate is. It's pretty good, but it's not super great. It's running decently. We're in like the high 30s or low 40s. But this is where a technology like DLSS can completely change things. Because if I go here and I enable it, there we go. So not only is it running much faster, but you'll notice that the quality has actually improved. Before we were looking at it at 100% res with TAA anti-aliasing. It's the standard anti-aliasing method used, or that we've been using for a good while now. And I'll switch back to that so you can see. Look at some of the trees in the distance, like right in the middle of the scene. So there it is with the old anti-aliasing method, and you can see it's not as crisp. It's a little blurrier. It loses some of the details, some of the edging and so on. And then if I switch DLSS back on, you can see what it does. Everything is a little bit crisper. It's sharper. It's almost like a very subtle sharpen filter is put over your entire scene, pulling out details at distance. And in this case, the frame rate goes way up. It goes from something that's in the 30-40 frame a second range to easily over 60 frames a second, which, for an environment like this, that's really amazing that this is even possible. I mean, when ray tracing was being developed, the one thing that was going to be really difficult for the technology would be a jungle or a forest type scene. Anything that had lots of translucency, those become very complex calculations for ray tracing to sample against. But here we're doing it. We have a ray trace sunlight and skylight, ambient occlusion. Everything that we've seen in the other fully dynamic example map. But here you can see the benefits of it in a photorealistic setting. Scenes like this have always been very challenging in rendering, especially in real time. In a game setting where it's the most challenging. Usually we have to resort to tons of trickery or maybe specialized lighting in certain areas in order to achieve a scene that
that looks this detailed but is also running well at the same time. Ray tracing gives us the ability to create these fully occluded areas. Like here I am in complete shadow under like tree canopies, and it still has a nice sort of ambient term to it. Like it's not completely devoid of light. Like the character is picking up a little bit of ambient light, especially off to the side here where there's a little bit less trees. So there's some skylighting coming in, as you can see as I move out of the canopy there. I'm starting to pick up some of the skylighting. And it's a ray traced environment, so here we are with real reflections on the lake. And if I move back up here, you can see there's just a lot going on here where the trees open up a little bit and the lighting opens up. The capability for very dynamic lighting, very full lighting and shadow, opens up for these kinds of open world settings.
I'd like to wrap this session up with a glimpse of what's to come. We have some incredible ray tracing technologies on the horizon.